the Torah will change, but it's going to change within the realm of kosher Torah changes, because anyway, we hold by whatever the court says. So let's look at page 183, first column on the right, and the very last line. It says, Batam hadavar, shla'asi lavo yishtane shikul hadas dechachmi Yisrael lintoa kadas beis Shammai. Why is it that in the future, all of a sudden, all the Chachamim are going to decide suddenly to vote like Beis Shammai? In other words, we understand that they can, but why would they? Yesh lomer, al pi divrei Gemara. What did we already say about Beis Shammai? Mechadei tefei. They were smarter, right? And in fact, that's why we needed a bas kol to come and remind us, no, go like the majority, because there was a suffix, they were so smart that maybe we should go like them even though they're not the majority. Well, if they would be the majority and they're smarter, certainly that makes sense. So in the future, it makes sense that everyone's going to go like Beis Shammai because everyone's going to be smarter. Shemailasam the chachmas haTorah gedolim mailas Beis Hillel. Their greatness in the wisdom of Torah was greater than Beis Hillel. Ela shebizman hazeh ein halacha kamosam, but in these days the halacha is not like them. Kevin sharov chachmi Yisrael shemachrim halacha al pi daitam, because the majority of sages who have to rule in accordance to the way they understand it in their own mind. They can't just say, oh, well, in the future, it's going to be like Shammai, so I'll just vote like him. No, they're not allowed to do that. They have to understand it that way. Therefore, we go like Beis Hillel because we didn't reach to the state where we could actually understand the world through the eyes of Beis Shammai yet. Yes?
But who decided that they're smarter than Shammai, Beis Shammai?
Beis Hillel.
The majority of the sages at the time said that
Beis Hillel decided they were smarter.
Really?
Yeah, that's why they were in a suffix. That's why they didn't like basic just wrote according to the majority, because they realized Beis Shammai were some smart guys. They were afraid.
Why don't they give deference to Beis Shammai instead of having their own opinion?
For the exact reason that we just said, you're not allowed to do that. If you don't understand, you can't rule on it because your friend did. It's a very, very important klal in the judgment of the Sanhedrin. A judge bichlal, right? We said. We quoted, Ein lo ladayan elamasha einav ro'os. A judge can only rule in accordance with what he understands, what his eyes see. Even if a prophet's going to come in and tell him, I heard from heaven that this is the law, it is completely disinterested in you. The Torah requires you to rule in accordance with your own understanding. And therefore, what happened was all of Beis Hillel understood it a certain way, but they were bothered by the fact that their smarter friends didn't understand it that way, so they didn't just rule according to the majority so simply. They couldn't explain it. They couldn't explain it. No. If they could explain it, then it would have gone into the minds of Beis Hillel. There is such a thing. It says, for example, like Rabbi Meir, it says that his chaverav lo amar al sof daitav, like his people he was talking to did not understand what he was saying. Like he was trying to explain them deep concepts, and the halacha doesn't often go like Rabbi Meir, even though the Mishnah is stam Mishnah Rabbi Meir. We don't often hold like him because he was sort of a step higher than everybody, and they couldn't understand what he was saying. They understood that he was the leader and he was great, but he couldn't bring it down to their level. So in the present day, we have to go like Beis Hillel because that's the way they understand it. They didn't yet reach the level of Shammai's understanding. Like the sages said, hello, I'm good. They didn't make the halacha like Rabbi Meir, right? Even though ein bedoro kamo, so there was none like him in his generation. Mishum shelo yachlu chaverav lamor al sof daito. They couldn't. I thought I read this before. They couldn't understand what he was saying. Pashut was just so much brighter than them. He could not explain himself to them. It's a thing, right? Thank God we live in a generation where the Rabbeim gave us Chabad Chassidus, where they can actually express themselves to us. Because, there was a Yom just a few days ago. It says that, what was the Chiddush? It says the Chassidim were sitting around for bringing. They said, what was the Chiddush of the Alter Rebbe? They said, until before that time, the Rebbe was alone and the Chassidim were alone. And the students were alone. And when the Alter Rebbe came to the world, he changed it so the Rebbe wasn't alone and the students were alone. It's exactly what he's talking about right now. He broke the brain barrier to enable the ideas of these tzaddikim, which previously we could not understand what they were talking about. They could explain themselves all day long. We didn't chop it, and now we can.
I thought there was an Indian that the higher you are, the lower you can bring it down.
They didn't get high enough yet. They were high, but they didn't get high enough to bring it down. Let's look at some footnotes. I love the footnotes here. Well, we skipped a few juicy ones, but let's look at footnote number 61. So we just got through saying Rabbi Meir was too high; they didn't understand his what he was saying. But Zeu Atam, this is the reason why when they argued in Masifta the Rakim, and we keep talking about this both in the morning and the afternoon, we get back to this argument in heaven and the yeshivas of heaven. It says HaKadosh Baruch Hu said such and such, v'kula Masifta the Rakia Amre such and such, right? Hashem was like on one side, and all of the people in the heavenly court were on another side, arguing with Hashem. It's exactly the question you asked. When they heard that God said a certain answer, you'd think they would have just voted that way. How could you chas v'shalom, stand up and give an opinion, which is the opposite of God? He showed up in court. Even in heaven, the psak din has to be according to the mind of those souls sitting in heaven. They have to understand it that way. And therefore, when God gave his opinion, who could understand God's opinion? Can't understand anything about God. Therefore, they had to paskin in accordance to the way they saw it, and they did not paskin like HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the same thing with Rabbi Meir down here, so it is with Hashem upstairs. You have to understand it in order to rule that way. So back inside, Masha ein kein lasilavu, not in the future. You kol Yisrael, all the Jewish people, like Rambam Paskins, and how much more so Elu sheyivchu mikol Yisrael based on Agam Shebishrayim. How much more so the chosen of the chosen who are going to actually sit in the Beis Din, the Sanhedrin of Mashiach. They are chachamim gedolim as they get. Therefore, tiyetzel rubam, it will be by the majority, and the Rebbe says maybe even by all of them, the entire group of them. Milas chachma de Beis Shammai. They will have the understanding of Beis Shammai. That we're so genius and so bright. And therefore, they're going to paskin all new laws, and everything's going to go according to Beis Shammai, because they'll be the majority. So this question that we had, why suddenly we're going to switch? Because everyone's going to be as smart as Beis Shammai. Therefore, it comes out in the future, there's going to be a change in the laws of the Torah. Al pi teva. In other words, a natural change. It's not some kind of a supernatural intervening, which is going to chas v'shalom tamper with the laws of the Torah. Shekol ha'adam seichel ha'adam al pi teva seichel ha'adam. Sorry, there will be a natural change in the law based on the nature of man's understanding, as an outcome from the darga nailis yosef b'liban Torah, from the fact that he's going to be learning a whole nother level, higher level of Torah, because he will see the deeper inner panemius of the Torah. He'll be more intelligent, and he'll be able to paskin in a completely different way. And therefore, all the laws will switch over and will hold like Shammai. And why is this? Because the level of Torah learning will advance incredibly, like the level of Beis Shammai, who were brighter. Al derech ubedugmas. He says this is very similar and an example of the heter of the shechita shur habar b'snapiri aliviyasam kikshe Torah chadash me'iti teitzei. This is exactly, or it's an example of the type of change that's going to take place when, remember, let's just go back and revisit this for a second. Mashiach is going to be two things, right? A prophet and wiser than Shlomo. Why is he going to be a prophet? Because he's going to dig deep into the Torah that no human mind can ever touch. He's going to suddenly come out with this idea that the shechita is of this particular animal was always kosher. There's no laws being changed over here. It turns out that the entire Shulchan Aruch of shechita was just missing a page, which Mashiach showed us, which says this particular shechita can be done by a fin. But he has to be wiser than Shlomo in order to, unlike Beis Shammai, be able to explain it to everybody else, right? But once he explains it to everybody else, it's not going to be Torah b'shamayim. It's going to be something that everyone understands, and they vote on and they paskin. So it's a natural change in the Torah, which is not requiring some kind of a supernatural experience. It's just that Mashiach is going to be able to explain it to them in a way they understand. Exactly an example of all the halachas that are going to change and go toward the Beis Shammai because of the new understanding. We're going to be able to paskin differently. Yeah.
Didn't we just say like Hashem wouldn't even explain his opinions like those souls in that?
Yes, Hashem was needed to learn Chabad Chassidus first. In other words, the idea is that there's levels which yet cannot be explained, and if you go to a deeper level, you can bring even the highest ideas down to the lowest level. So There was a whatever level was called. Actually, what does it say in that Gemara? It says Hakadosh Baruch Hu. Hakadosh Baruch Hu is a name for Hashem that's like kadosh and moved up. Basically, he didn't bring himself down to explain it to them.
Hashem couldn't do that?
He could. He didn't. Just like Rabbi Meir, in theory, he could. I'm telling you, there's a big deal that happened with this Chabad Chassidus business. The secret mysteries of the Torah were hidden from all mankind until some guy decided to mamash have Mesiras Nefesh 53 days in prison, and he was given the keys to explain secrets to us, right? And as I said again, you say, wow, how could it be? How they put a man on the moon all of a sudden? How we have telecommunications all of a sudden? How are we sitting here speaking to the entire world all of a sudden? Something happened, right? A new type of like wisdom was granted to mankind, and it was a gift from heaven. Right? It's the same thing with the Torah, by the way. What about the first 26 generations? There was no Torah on the earth. We couldn't do mitzvahs. We couldn't connect to the Eibishter. Even though there was a Torah in heaven, God didn't give it to us, right? Because in order to give the Torah, you have to go from even a higher source than the Torah in heaven. You have to go to the Torah like in the Atzmus. And then, if you access that, the Torah from heaven can touch and kiss and join the Torah on earth. Which is why we're so excited about Matan Torah coming up. It's not just a celebration that we got the Torah. It's a celebration that we got the Atzmos of Hashem, because it required the essence of God to bring the Torah from Shemaim and make us understand it down here. So this process within Torah continues to show itself and develop itself. Before there was a Mishnah, we didn't have that access to such a clear, deep understanding of a systematic understanding of the laws. Until there was a Rambam, we didn't have a Shulchan Aruch. And every time there's a kind of an increase in man's ability to understand Torah, it's because another level higher was achieved in order to get it down to our level. We're at the end of days. We're in mamash the last final moments. So literally, there's no secrets left, right? Hashem gave it to us in Chassidus. Okay, going on to Os Ches.
There's no secrets left.
There's one secret left. I'll tell you later. Okay. Bira kesher v'ashayches the beis inyanim hanal. So, to explain the connection of these two matters, which is she's chad shulasi lavo, two things that will be new in the future. One, you guys don't have the next page, correct?
No.
Here, pass this around. Ruby, we got to make more. We're running out. Okay, so the two things that are going to be renewed in the future. We're still on the last page. Just one more line there, which is the halacha is going to go like Beis Shammai. We're now kind of deepening our conversation. We've just brought out a couple ideas. One, the halacha goes like Beis Shammai because they're smarter. Mechad de tefei. And the heter of the shchita shurabar, the snapira leviasan, and the shchita of the ox with the fin. Turning the page, because Torah chadashim iti teitzei. So with these two things together, tzrich lahavim, we have to understand a few things. Now, in other words, we've just basically come to understand the idea of changing halacha in our unique case, which is called Torah chadasha, from looking at the concept of the massive, widespread change of halacha that's going to take place with Beis Shammai, and we made a parallel between them. The greater, deeper the knowledge is going to come out, the ability for us to vote a different way. But that being said, we're now going to have three questions on that comparison after Noam's question.
All right. So in regards to footnote 6, which we started last class, we didn't finish it. We didn't post the quarter, which was that in order to change the previous ruling, ruling, the Beis Din would have to be both greater in number and people would also have to be smarter. And the question, how can a Beis Din be greater in numbers?
We did answer that. We did answer that. In short, the answer that we gave was the Beis Din has the same number of people in it, but the idea that they're greater in number is that the people of the Am, more of them will get what they're saying and understand the rulings of the Beis Din. So even if they don't understand it, it doesn't mean that they don't have to follow it. But the idea is that a greater in number means that the Am will be elevated to a point that they'll actually be able to understand the Paski. And when I say the Am, I don't mean necessarily the simple people. I mean all those other judges that are outside of that main court. We said there's like a ranking of judges. Like they're all on board. Like they're basically voting the same way. They don't get a vote, But if they would get a vote, they would vote the same way. That means it's a bigger in number. Okay, so going on. So we have 3 questions now about this comparison between the Shor HaBor situation and Beis Shammai situation, which was a nice parallel. One question. The Chiddush of the Halacha Beis Shammai, hu l'chumra. So right off the bat, there's a major difference between them. Paskin Beis Shammai means everyone's going to suddenly be very strict. The whole world's going to go into a state of crazy strictness, right? To make that which was permissible to now make it usher, because that's what Beis Shammai ruled on everything. That which was permissible nowadays, according to the lenient opinions of Hillel, it will become suddenly prohibited, as Beis Shammai, who's machmir. Whereas in the case that we're trying to compare to, which is the Shechita Shor HaBar, the Snapir Yasan, the Chiddush is for a kula, right? That the Kadosh Baruch Hu says you can eat this fish, right? Or excuse me, this animal from this strangely kosher Shechita. Whereas if we're basing everything on the fact that we're going to get smarter and vote like Shammai, and therefore we're going to be all being prohibiting everything, why is the classic poster child of changing of halacha of dafka permitting something which was previously usher? So that's just an interesting distinction. Yeah.
What is that? Is it a fish or is it another animal? What is it?
The Leviathan?
Yeah.
It's like it has fins, that we can be sure of. It's a giant fish. Anyway, don't run away now. The point is that in the case of this Torah Chadash of Mashiach, what happens? That which was prohibited became permissible, because you couldn't eat this in a normal. Everything becomes prohibited, right? So it's like we're using this as a example to understand the Torah Chadasha, but it's actually hafuch, the opposite. Second question. The Beis Shammai. This is a much more sophisticated question and troubling. Why are we going to need so many more prohibitions when Mashiach comes?
Yeah.
Right? And everything becomes usher and everything becomes chumrah. But makom haterim v'akul the Beis Shammai, as said, where nowadays we can, and all of a sudden Mashiach's going to come. You can't on every turn.
Yeah.
You think the other way around. When dafka in the future there will be no need for any prohibitions. Why? Certainly not the need to make all kinds of new ones. Why? Because why are there prohibitions? To stop you from doing something bad. And since in the future bad will be gone, as it says, "Es ruach atuma aver min haaretz," I'm going to remove the spirit of impurity from the earth. Therefore, there will not lo yiyeh elahu safa v'chiddush b'kedusha. All there's going to be, what are you going to be doing all day? You don't have to refrain from anything. Seemingly, you have to just do more and more good, right? Just like elevate in the realm of va'aseh tov and constantly grow higher, right? Specifically from this concept, there's going to be a new Torah, so much more to learn. So why all of a sudden am I going to be faced with every single prohibition in the entire book? Maybe you're not so much looking forward to Mashiach all of a sudden, chas v'shalom, right? In other words, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it does not.
And the third difficulty, which of comparing these two cases, the Shor HaBor and the Shammai situation, is that logei l'sibas achidush the halacha Beis Shammai, when it comes to the reason for the halacha going like Beis Shammai, sheshikol adas az berov chachmei Yisrael yiyeh kashitas Beis Shammai shemachad tefei, which we said was because suddenly the calculations of the majority of the wise men of Israel will go suddenly in accordance with Shammai, who was brighter. Let's take a look. This is not the first time this happened. I talked to you guys about this the other day. We find that there were a few times when the majority went like Shammai, right? In those few halachas, when they actually voted, and there's a handful of cases that the halacha was like Shammai because they were the majority, right? It says, Bo the minion, they came to the count, to the vote. They found Shammai greater. And what does the Gemara say? Also ayom, that day, where it says in the footnote 65, there was 18 different gezeras that suddenly went, that the Shammai was the majority. It says what? It was a terrible day. It was as difficult of a day for the Jewish people, the day that the golden calf was made. Davar hachi chamor, the worst thing that ever happened in the entire history of mankind. Hepech b'tachlis ma'ashlemus the Torah chadash mi'titetzei. Isn't that the exact opposite of the new Torah of Mashiach that's going to come and save us in the future? So how does it make sense that suddenly we're going to all go like Shammai, when we did go like Shammai, it was literally the worst thing that ever happened in history. And here it's going to be a symbol of the greatest thing that's ever going to happen in history. Troubling, all three questions.
Very troubling.
Yesh levar techila hamakar lo safa v'chidish v'mitzvahs Torah b'yamos Mashiach b'halacha. Okay, so 3 minutes. Let's give it a gander. Okay, so it says, first of all, we're going to go doing a deep dive. We want to find the source in halacha of the concept of adding mitzvahs to the Torah in the days of Mashiach. In other words, where does this whole thing come from? Like you said, we're talking about midrashim, we're talking about theories. Show me in halacha where there's a concept of adding mitzvahs to the Torah. Dafka when Mashiach comes. Does anyone know? Where? Yeah, adding mitzvahs, right? It's
Rambam something?
going to be Rambam.
Always is.
You can always count on Rambam. Right, because he says, as you pointed out, when it comes to the heter of the shechita shurabor, that's mucker in the midrash. It's not a mucker in halacha, right? So it's a level of, you still have to deal with it, like I spoke to you about. You have to, like, in other words, the midrash discussing a halacha, but it's discussing in the realm of midrash. But where do we see in the realm of halacha that there's a source for adding and changing the Torah in the future, after when Mashiach comes, right? That the halacha is going to go to like Beis Shammai, right? And and this idea that the halacha goes like Beis Shammai, it's also not a mucker in halacha. That's a mucker in Kabbalah, right? That comes from the Arizal. So in other words, we have such a concept in Midrash and Kabbalah. Where do we see it? Mamash b'kipshuta halacha l'maisa, and he says it comes from the Rambam. The laws of Malachim u'Milchamos u'Melech HaMashiach b'Sefer HaYad in the Mishnah Torah of the Rambam. It's called Sefer HaYad. There's 14 chapters, 14 books. So these are in the laws called kings and their wars and the laws of Mashiach. We're going to find there's a indication of the change of in halacha when Mashiach comes. And I think we're going to talk about that tomorrow or after we get the Torah. Chazak u'Baruch. Okay, pass them back in. What's that?